This year we had 53 pilots, twice as many pilots as last year. We lost 3 days outright to wind and storms, giving us 4 tasks, all of which were pretty marginal. Last year it's fair to say that I was overly picky on the days that I flew, and this competition did give me a better sense of what's possible on suboptimal days, so it was a good experience despite the weather. I bought a 10x4 harness, and this trip was the first time I was able to fly with it. I also made a Sprague camera mount, which works well, other than the fact that the Sprague itself rotates. So sorry for the nausea-inducing footage. I'm looking for a solution to that. I got to Quest 2 days early. Both practice days, a 29-kilometer out and return task, was set to Grassroots, an airport to the north. The first practice day was pretty marginal, and I landed just short of Grassroots. The second practice day was probably the best soaring day of the trip. A thermal shook me off tow at 800 feet, but I got up anyway and joined a gaggle of around 10 sailplanes, climbing inside their larger circle. I don't have any pictures of that, unfortunately, but it was fun seeing them up close. I easily made it to Grassroots and back in about the time that it took me to make it less than halfway the day before, then flew around Quest for a couple more hours before landing. Task 1 was 40 kilometers crosswind to the south, then downwind east to Wallaby Ranch. I launched first and got up right away to 4,000 feet, quickly followed by Thor, John Alden, Richard Milla, and our mentor John Simon, and in short order we all topped out together and went on glide. John heads out following course line into a big blue hole. I look upwind to my right and spot some gliders climbing under a cloud, and decide to break from the group and go there instead. And John Alden follows me as well. When I arrive at the cloud, I only get weak lift, and I look over to where John Simon and the others are, and they're hooking a nice juicy thermal and quickly getting higher than me up to cloud base. I'm kicking myself at this point for not following John. I mean, here I am on one of my first flights of the season, betting against one of the best pilots in the world. I felt pretty foolish. So I decided to go join them. They weren't that far away, and I figured I could hook what they had and we could all get back together again. John Alden, though, wisely chooses to stay with what we had. When I get there, I'm greeted by more of what I just left. Weak, bubbly lift. I missed the stronger thermal that they had. They go on glide and are gone. I look back to the cloud I just left, and now the gliders there are hooking a great thermal and getting to cloud base. At this point, I'm really tearing into myself. First I bet against John Simon and lose, then I leave poor lift for worse lift, and now I'm deciding to fly back upwind where I just came from, even lower than before. I felt like I was just throwing away the first day of the competition. But fortunately it works. I hook a stout thermal and I'm soon at cloud base, and then go on glide down a good-looking series of clouds. Things are pretty easy from here on out, going from cloud to cloud, staying high and upwind of course line. Just before the turn point I'm climbing in lift, and to my surprise John Simon, Richard, and Thor joined my thermal from below. Reviewing the trek logs later would show that they had gotten fairly low after leaving the thermal earlier, which cost time to recover from and put them more downwind than my track had taken me. I was only with them for a moment, as topping out this thermal was all I needed to tag the turn point and make it to Wallaby. John Alden, Thor, and Richard go on glide shortly after, but have to stop for some more lift on the way. John Alden makes it to goal, but unfortunately Thor and Richard land just short. After all the mistakes and messing around, I wind up coming in second out of 9 people who made it. The soaring conditions for me felt really very good. I was hooking some strong and mostly smooth thermals after the initial struggle. However, the day was in fact marginal. A lot of good pilots before me and after had a much worse go of it, and a good number of people didn't even leave Quest. The landing is coming up here shortly, and it's one of the worst I've ever done. There was a mild headwind and the field was really buoyant. Good conditions for landing. Even after failing to transition my left hand, all I really needed to do was run it out a bit instead of trying to flare. I landed well both practice days, but I had pretty bad landings through the rest of the competition, and it wouldn't be until I reviewed the video later that I would figure out why that was happening, which I'll get back to at the end of the video. That's Larry off my right, and I fly right over Greg, who landed just moments before. The forecast for Task 2 was for weak lift, no clouds, and stronger wind than the day before, and the same task was called to Wallaby. It wasn't a great day. Most people didn't leave Quest, and nobody made it to goal. I got 1/3 of the way there, landing just after an hour. All of the lift I encountered was weak, and the best thermal I had was just 120 feet per minute. Here's the landing. Again, notice I failed to transition my left hand, but at least this time I run it out. Task 3's forecast was for north winds, no clouds, and weak lift. The task was set straight downwind 53 kilometers to Winter Haven Airport. I had a bit of an exciting tow here. Leaving the airfield, the tow speed was too high and I had to bring my knees to the bar to fly fast enough. It slowed down shortly after and was fine for the rest of the tow. This flight I stuck mostly with Davis. It was broken, very weak, and a lot of work. The glides tended to be fairly buoyant, however. Our team was together at first. We jumped from our first gaggle to the next successfully, but then noticed that the gaggle in front of us was starting to sink. Davis went on glides somewhat more easterly, and I chased after. John and Richard didn't follow, and I didn't see them again for the rest of the flight. I got quite low after that first glide, and it took a while to get back up. I would drop to 1,000 feet twice after this, slowly digging my way out each time. The flight lasted 2 hours, but it felt much longer. I was in total concentration trying to climb well the whole flight. In the last thermal, I was joined by an eagle and a smaller bird to celebrate all the altitude that I needed to make it to goal. I was the first one in, with only Tim Delaney making it as well 47 minutes later. The airport itself was goal, and we were able to land there if we wished, but next door there was a large unplanted field next to the road, which was the obvious landing choice. Again here, for some reason, I don't transition the left hand, and I go into a full sprint to make it work out. Task 4's forecast was for south-southeast winds, no clouds, and better lift than the other days. The task was set to leeward 58 kilometers to the north, a place that we went last year twice, and I had made it to goal both of those times. So I was starting to feel hopeful about my chances of finishing in first or second place, which certainly would have been cool. This day did have better lift, but it was also characterized by strong sink and punishing glides. My mentality was play it safe, get to goal. I didn't need to be fast, I just needed to make it. While this may have been the right way to think about it, things played out in ways I was not accustomed to, and I made a lot of mistakes. The flight started well, catching a stout thermal and getting over 5,000. I went on glide to the nearest gaggle, which Larry and Zach were in, along with many other pilots. Soon the rest of my team and Mitch Shipley would be there as well. Things were good. We were topped out in lift. At the edge of the starting cylinder, we should go on glide. And yet nobody was. Richard Milla goes first, but nobody follows, and he reports strong sink. Mitch, our mentor for the day, chases after him. I'm strongly tempted to follow, but should I? I'm confused why people aren't going. Even Larry and Zach are still here. Do they know something I don't? Are they waiting for the day to get better? It's been a full hour, and I haven't been on a real glide yet. I eventually decide this has been a waste of time, and I leave on a more westerly heading than Richard took. And I get absolutely crushed in sink. I get some light lift that I'm slowly climbing in, and surprisingly I see Mitch and John climbing in a better thermal not far away. I get impatient and decide I can jump over to theirs without too much of a cost. There is significant sink between the two thermals though, and unfortunately their thermal was dead when I arrived. They go on glide, and not unlike the mistake I made in Task 1, but this time I pay for it. Before long, I'm over a farm at just 800 feet. It gets warm and smooth, and I cling on to the faintest dregs of lift. It takes me 6 minutes to gain just 400 feet. And then to my great relief, it thickens up into a 300 foot per minute thermal, which I take back to 4,000 feet. At the top of lift, I find the gaggle that I left now 40 minutes earlier. At least I have company. Again though, they just aren't going on glide. I spot a couple gliders climbing in the distance and leave for them, which works. But everything has been taking so long, I start to worry about running out of sun power. Now over the villages, I'm next to the eastern edge of the turn point, which in this case is very large, and it's been a balancing act trying to top out and tag it before taking the glide north. However, I fail to understand just how north I am, and wind up essentially flying directly away from it while going to some climbing gliders. This forces me to fly more upwind and attempt to tag it. However, it's 6 p.m. now, and that just doesn't happen. I land in a field with Crystal Wolf. This time I was very intent on transitioning my left hand, and we can clearly see now why I had not been before. While trying to transition the hand, I just fall forwards. When I first got the harness, I removed 2 of the foot pads in an effort to increase comfort. On the 2 training days, I found that this was decidedly not comfortable, as it was putting a lot of strain on my spine. It also would prefer to rock up instead of wanting to be in the flying position. So I put the foot pads back in, and also moved the front limiter back 1 notch. This solved both issues, and by and large I was pretty comfortable through the competition. However, it greatly impacted my ability to get upright, leading to all of these bad landings. So I've moved the limiter back to its original spot. Technically, I never flew with it at the default settings that it came with. The foot pads moved my CG forward some as well, so it could be that it was correct all along. Overall, it was a difficult but successful competition, and I learned a lot. I came in 4th, which is still better than I expected at the start, and Task 3 was my first day win. Had I decided to tag the turn point in Task 4 earlier when I was right next to it, the point difference would have been enough to get 3rd instead. So, lesson learned. The last thing I'll say is that it feels good to have been able to get such long and successful flights on such underwhelming days. Even Task 2 was nearly an hour. I'm very happy that I can feel frustrated after a 3-hour-long flight. It really wasn't that long ago that alone would have been a personal best.